Join us as we dive into the history, hauntings, and high strangeness of the world to try to better understand the paranormal. I will be your guide. I am paranormal researcher and investigator Eric Freeman Sims. Welcome to the Unseen Paranormal Podcast. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Unseen Paranormal. I am your host, as usual, Eric. And today we have an amazing guest talking about an awesome topic. We have Miss Lynn Monet coming back to the show, and we're going to talk about death and dying and the dying process and what happens after you die. She has been a hospice nurse for many, many years and an RN for many, many years, and has had lots of experiences with the death and dying of different patients and things like that. And she's seen some incredible things and experienced some incredible things, as well as I have. And I share a few of my stories on here of things that I've seen and experienced and what kind of proves to me that there is an afterlife. I love this episode because hopefully it tells you and gives you some evidence from our stories that your loved ones have passed on to somewhere better and that there is somewhere that we go. And I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything, but I want to put shows like this out there so that you see that there are stories like this. And this is just not my experience in medicine or Lynn's. This is many experiences from nurses and doctors and EMTs and nurse techs and everybody out there in the medical field have some of these experiences. And a lot of people don't like to talk about them for whatever reason. I think it's good to bring these to the forefront. But if you know any hospice nurses, they'll tell you stories like this. Some of the incredible things that I've seen and some of the stories that I tell in this episode are some of the reasons why I believe in afterlife. And why I believe that we go somewhere better when we die and we just change our existence. It is hard to dismiss some of these things and some of the incredible things that happen in the medical field. And I don't think they're talked about enough in the paranormal as evidence. And yeah, you can't prove this stuff, but I can tell you from my own stories and from my own experiences that it is incredible, some of the things. So hopefully this conversation brings some solace and help some people through the grieving process of losing loved ones. I myself have lost many loved ones throughout my life, and I think the experiences in the paranormal and working in the medical field have helped me move through that. Both of my parents are gone. I lost one of my best friends when I was 18. Two of my brothers have died. Two of my aunts are gone. You know, I've lost a lot of people close to me throughout my life, but I think they've gone on to a better place, and I think they come back and visit. I've had experiences like that I talk about in this episode as well. And Miss Lynn has a lot of incredible experiences and things that she's experienced working as a hospice nurse and things that just can't be dismissed or, they're just incredible. So hopefully this helps some of y'all out there. I think having these conversations is amazing. This is not, I don't want y'all to think this is a depressing episode by any means, because it's not. There are some funny stories in there too. And it's meant to be an uplifting episode to tell you that, your loved ones have gone to a better place and there is somewhere that we go after we die, and that push through this life and there's better waiting on the other side, no matter what religion you believe in, and not coming from any guise of religion whatsoever. And that your experiences are your experiences, and don't let anybody ever take them away from you and take away your beliefs in the paranormal or your religion or what's beyond us because of what somebody else says or does. But also at the same time, we all have to respect each other in this world, and there's too little of that nowadays. Just because we don't think or believe or have the same opinions as somebody else doesn't mean that we can't be friends with those people. You may actually just learn something from those people, and you don't have to change your views and beliefs, but you can learn from them people and maybe expand your views and beliefs and open your mind to new things and new possibilities. But anyway, I'll stop rambling on here and we'll get on with today's episode. Lynn has 4 books out, and they're available on her website, lynnmonet.com. They're available on barnesandnoble.com as well as Amazon and Kindle. And I will put those links in the show notes as usual. So y'all go check out Lynn's books. And also, if you didn't catch her the first time on the show, telling about the haunted house that she bought that possibly has a portal in it, go back to, I believe it's season 2. I will repost that online. Anybody wants to go back and hear her ghost story, and we'll have her back on very soon to talk about some other paranormal stuff that's happening to her here recently. Thank y'all so much for listening to the show. Hopefully you enjoy this episode. So without further ado, I give you Miss Lynn Monet. All right. Hey, Lynn, welcome back to the show. Thanks for coming back on.
Oh, I am so excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, my pleasure. We had such a great conversation last time I had you on. We talked about your book and the haunted house that you owned. And this time we had talked off air a lot about us both working in the medical field and experiences we had. So I wanted to have you back on and pick your brain because you've been in the medical field for over 30 years as a nurse and experienced lots of things with death and dying and things like that with people. And so I wanted to get your story, some of your stories on the show here.
Oh, I would love to share. I have been a nurse for over 30 years, and 17 of that has been in end of life and palliative care. So I've seen hundreds of people pass away at their time of death, and I have been able to share in some very beautiful things because of that I would love to share and hope to take the stigma of death and dying away for people, because we don't die. Life really begins once we cross over.
Yeah, and I've never worked myself in end of life care specifically. Of course, working on the ambulance, private duty and stuff, I've transported people to different hospice locations and things like that, and of course, working emergency medicine, I've seen lots of death and stuff. But yeah, man, whenever the thing I remember about some of the hospice care places, they're really peaceful. But man, the energy is like thick in there when you walk in, and you can just feel it. And it's not a bad. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying, you can feel all of that energy in there, and it's pretty incredible to walk into those places. But I have mad respect for people like you, because y'all, whenever I talk to any nurses or anybody that works in that part of healthcare, I love that y'all's mission is kind of to take the stigma away from death.
If you're doing your job right, you're not just caring for the person that is transitioning, but there's also the care for the family. And yeah. The thing is that we are so conditioned that death is such a horrible thing, and there's the finality to it. And the thing that people don't realize is you're going to see your loved one again. It's like they're going on a long vacation. They are with you all of the time. They can hear you when you're speaking. They are at all of the events, whether it's graduations or weddings, and you hear people say, oh, I wish Aunt so-and-so was here. I can promise you she's probably sitting in one of the empty seats. Yeah. So, and if there isn't an empty seat, she's made herself one, and she's there with the whole family, because they plan to be present for those sorts of things even before the plans are made, because they know it's coming ahead of time. So I have seen so many things, and I would love to share some of those stories with you.
Yeah. And I think what a lot of people don't understand also is that dying is a process, because in movies and like TV shows and things that we see, people are just dead. Like there's no, but there's an entire process that happens there, especially with people with cancer and terminal illnesses and things like that, or even like, just old age. There's an actual whole process that goes along with the dying of the body.
There is, and actually there are three kinds of death. There is natural death, which most of us have. There is sudden death, and there are near-death experiences, and they are all handled differently on the other side. The ones that I have experienced are the natural deaths. So I've seen those, and I'm sure that in the emergency room, you've probably experienced some sudden deaths, and you hear people talking about their near-death experiences. I've had one, my father had one, and it's it is a process. Sometimes people start seeing loved ones, and they can start seeing them as early as a year in advance, and they'll start talking about them. And unfortunately, the medical field, the way that they've been conditioned, they assume that it's hallucination. So they run and get the meds to try to stop the people from talking about it. But, they don't stop seeing them, and they're still talking about them, even on the meds. So, and I can see them too, so I know that they're there.
Yeah, I've had a few experiences with that, and luckily I started out working Alzheimer's units in nursing homes is how I got my start as a nurse tech. And so I was able to learn early on that was just a natural part of the dying process. And to be in an environment of like a nursing care home, to where that was just a fact of life. Instead of like when I go into emergency medicine, like you're saying, they run to get the meds and things in the hospital environment, Towards like in the nursing home, you see it so much that you understand that it's just part of that process. And we even had a lady who one time, when I worked in one nursing home, that she wasn't dying herself. She was in end-stage Alzheimer's, and she was pretty much nonverbal, but she would start yelling about the men in the corner. And I mean, this is a lady that she couldn't even answer yes and no questions. But when she started yelling about the men in the corner, somebody was going to pass away in the nursing home. And that was just kind of a fact that I learned, and it was just nonchalant with everybody. It's just like, okay, everybody get prepared. Miss so-and-so's yelling about the men in the corner. Who do we think is going to pass away?
That is so true. And I'm so happy that you brought that up. I also had an experience with an Alzheimer's patient. And the thing is people, to understand a little bit about the Alzheimer's, their soul is intact. People with Alzheimer's, they're half in and half out. When you look at them from a spiritual point, their heads are riding about 3 feet above their actual head. I had a lady named Shirley, and I had been at this place for almost 10 years, and she had been on my unit for about 5 years. So I remembered her when she was up walking around and talking and volunteering and helping people. And for 3 years, she had not spoken one word. She had transitioned into the Alzheimer's that far. And there was one day in particular that I was in the nurse's station. I was getting things ready to do my med pass. And I hear this woman yelling, "Take me home, please, please take me home." And I come out of the nurse's station and I'm looking around and I don't see anybody. And there's Shirley sitting there in front of the nurse's station. She'd stopped and she's looking down the hallway. And I thought, well, maybe a CNA or another nurse assisted the person because they've stopped calling. So I turned to go back into the back again. And all of a sudden I hear again, "Take me home, please, please take me home." And I turned around and it was Shirley. So I walked out to her and I patted her arm and I said, "Miss Shirley," I said, "who are you calling to take you home?" And she was pointing down the hallway that she was facing. And in that hallway, the very first door on your right was a lady that was actively passing. Her family was present. Her physical family was present in the room for this transitioning period. And I looked down also. And since I have the gift of second sight, which I can kind of turn on and off sometimes, because the first time I looked down the hallway, I didn't see anything. But then I looked again, because she was saying, look at the angels. Aren't they beautiful?" When I had asked her what she was looking at, and I saw the angels, and they were literally bulging out of this woman's room into the hallway. And that's what Shirley was seeing. And Shirley herself actually passed away about 3 months later. But wow. I totally concur with you on that. They can see them, when it comes close to time. And I've got many other things to bring that home. Even some events that occurred with patients that there is no way that anybody could dispute that they were that they were not seeing what they were seeing.
Right. Yeah, and one of the things, talking about Alzheimer's patients, one of the most incredible things I think I ever experienced working with the Alzheimer's patients was I had a lady who I took care of her every day. I worked Monday through Friday, 3 to 11 in shift. And so every day I took care of this one lady. Had the same patients every day. And the only thing that she would tell you is that she was cold, and she wouldn't talk otherwise with the Alzheimer's. She would still feed herself, and she was kind of wheelchair bound. And then one day I came in at 3:00 in the afternoon, and she's sitting at the nurse's station talking up a storm like she never had Alzheimer's, and she was completely lucid, and she told us all about her life and about performing on the Grand Ole Opry with her sisters when they were younger, and this incredible life that she had. She got to call and talk to her son for the first time in years and have a conversation with him, and she was lucid for about 12 hours, and she passed away the next day.
Yes.
And those moments of lucidity like that are the most amazing things that prove to me there is an afterlife, seeing that firsthand, because you got this patient whose brain is so far gone with Alzheimer's that they can't communicate, and a lot of them can't feed themselves. But then they have this maybe 24-hour or less period of complete lucidity where they're completely back to themselves and are communicating, and they remember things you tell them for that period of time. And it's just incredible.
Well, and as you know, we call that rallying. So in the medical field, that's where sometimes you'll walk in and their eyes are kind of glazed over and their body's flaccid and they're impossible to rouse, but yet they're still breathing. You can't wake them up though. And then all of a sudden you'll see their toes perk and their eyes will brighten up and they'll start talking. Like you said, they'll start talking about their past. They'll start talking even about things that they've seen on the other side. And I've had that happen, and people don't realize when loved ones are in that state of transition and the spirits are coming in to assist them, that is a time that the person's filters have effaced so they can hear the telepathy from the spirit world communication, as well as they can hear the physically embodied people's verbalization. And this is actually a time that through that person, you can talk to loved ones on the other side if you can bring yourself to do it. But most people are afraid of a ghost in the room, even if it's somebody that they're talking about that's familiar. Yeah. I have an example of that if you'd like me to share it.
Yeah.
Okay, I had a patient named Edna. She had been on my unit for about 2 weeks, and she was in the state of transitioning. And the thing about Edna is that she was totally blind. She had been blind for 10 years, could not see shadows, anything, nothing at all. And so her son and daughter were at her bedside, and she was having one of her rallying moments. And they came to the nurse's station and they said, "Mom's talking to people in the room that aren't there." And I said, well, okay. And of course, I'm kind of expecting this, but, people are uncomfortable with it. So they come to get the meds so that they stop talking about the people in the room.
Right.
So I said to them, I said, well, it was more of a comfort measure for them than for her because I knew she was fine. And I said to them, I said, well, let me walk down to your mama's room with you and see if I can help her be more comfortable. And when we walked into the room, she was sitting at a slant and she was smiling from ear to ear, and she was reaching up into the sky as if she was being handed something very fragile and delicate because she was being very careful with it. But she was so pleased with what it was. And I said to her, I said, Edna, who's here? And she said, George. And her daughter turned as white as a sheet and had to sit down because she said, well, George is my father, and my father passed away X amount of years ago. And then Edna pipes up and she says, and he's glad that you're taking good care of Pixie. Pixie was Edna's poodle. When George passed away, the son had to take possession of Pixie the poodle, who was still alive, an elderly dog, but still alive, because Edna, being blind, couldn't care for the dog anymore. And so the son told me the story, and he looked at me and he said, do you think my mom's hallucinating? And of course, I can't come out as a medical professional and say, no, I don't think your mom's hallucinating. I think that your dad is here. Not only that, how does a blind person hallucinate?
Right.
So I said to him, I said, do I'm not trying to change your belief system. And and first of all, too, I turned it around to him because I couldn't say, no, she's not hallucinating. I said, well, do you think she's hallucinating? And he said, well, I don't know. And I said, do you mind if I try something? I'm not trying to change your religious beliefs because this isn't about religion. This is about spirituality. And I've seen this happen a lot of times in my profession. Would you be okay if I do try something? And he said, yes. So I said to Edna, I said, Edna, can I ask George a question? And she nodded her head yes. And I said, George, what color is your son's shirt? And Edna said, yellow. And he was wearing a yellow Ralph Lauren polo shirt. Wow. Now, keeping in mind that she's totally blind.
Right.
George wasn't. George could see what color his son's shirt was. And of course, his son got it in that moment and said, hi, Dad. And of course, I gently left the room and left them with not only mom, but dad, too, because they were now having their, a moment with both.
Yeah.
So, and that really brought it home for me. I mean, there's no way that could have happened with her being blind. Right. She was actually seeing him. So that's one of the things that bring it home for me when that happened.
Yeah. I've seen the so-called hallucinations. And like you said, you kind of got to tiptoe around the family a little bit because of different beliefs and things. But yeah, it's pretty amazing to see that. And they're talking to, and usually it's always from what I've seen, it's always a happy thing of like, because they're being reunited with these people that they haven't seen in years and they've missed, like their parents or their siblings or their spouses or even children, you know, that they lost. And it's usually like a happy, good thing. I don't know if I've ever seen anybody that was like terrified.
You know, and it is a happy thing for them. And when they come to that point, they're ready to cross over. You know, I had another lady, if you'd like me to share the story, her name was Abigail. She was she had come onto my unit with her husband. They were looking for a place with 3 levels of care because of her husband's health declining. And so I met her when she fell and fractured her hip, and she was on my unit for a little while she was recovering from her surgery. And I came in one night. I was a night shift nurse on the weekends, and I came in and she said to me, she said, "Lynn, do you think I'm crazy?" And, you know, she'd been my patient for a couple of weeks and we'd built up a rapport. So I was teasing her and I kind of looked at her half cocked and I said, "Define crazy." And I was teasing her and she said, no, I mean, crazy. And I'm like, well, no, you know, why would you even say that? Why would you ask me that? And she said, well, I see my parents. She said, and I know that both of my parents are dead and they've been dead a while, but it makes me happy when they come to visit. And she said, and now because I'm seeing my parents, the doctor wants to put me on medication for hallucinations, and I don't want to stop seeing my parents. I don't want the medicine to make it go away. So I told her, I said, well, it's my understanding and report that you're going to be going home tomorrow. You're going to be discharged in the morning back to your house. And as your advocate, you can refuse. I said, if you are of sound mind, which you are, I said, you can refuse anything that you don't want to take. And so she was happy with that. And she went home. And about 6 to 8 months later, she was back on my unit again. She had found out that she had a very aggressive cancer, and she was on my unit for a little while as she was declining. And now she was talking about seeing a young woman and with a little girl in addition to her parents. And it was so real to her that she was taking cookies and cakes back from the dining room. And of course, this was creating a bug problem in her room. And we had to check her purse and things before she would go back into her room to prevent that. So, so there was one day in particular that I offered to help out a friend of mine that needed a day off, and I volunteered to work her day shift for her. And I went in, and it was shortly after the patients had been the clients had been put back into their rooms after lunch, and I was getting ready to go down and do my treatments. And as I'm passing Abigail's room on my left-hand side, she's sitting in her recliner next to this big picture window with one of those big air conditioners underneath like they have in the American hotels. And she's leaning forward with a piece of yellow butterscotch wrapped candy in her hand. And anybody else that would have passed by, it would have looked like she was trying to feed the air conditioner. But there was a woman and a young girl standing in front of her, and she was offering the candy to the little girl. And the woman had on a denim skirt and a white peasant top. She had long black hair parted down the middle. And the little girl that was standing in front of her had the same black hair, long and straight, but she had bangs. She had on a little blue pinafore dress with Mary Jane shoes. Very cute little girl. And I remember thinking, because Abigail didn't have children, I remember thinking, oh, wow, you know, it's nice. Abigail's got some visitors today. I'm so happy that somebody's coming to see her. And then all of a sudden, I realized I took like 3 steps past her door, and I'm like, well, wait a minute. I don't remember those people signing in at the nurse's station. And of course, as you know, I mean, we have to have a head count in the building just in case there's an emergency, and the fire department needs to know how many people to get out.
Right.
So I stepped back. And I knocked on the door frame, and of course, Abigail invited me in. And when I went in, there was nothing there. Now, the way that I see spirits is I can see them out of my peripheral vision as plain as I can see you standing there. I can tell you what your hairstyle is, what you've got on, what color your eyes are if you're close enough to me. From a front view, I can see them at a distance, kind of like it's similar to, it's more of an opaque look, like when you are in say a mall parking lot and you're walking to go into a store and you see your reflection. That reflection is what they look like to me. And when I get really, really close to them, I see a waffling to the air, like fumes, gas fumes or vapors coming off of a hot road, that waffling.
Yeah.
So when I walked into her room, there was nothing there, but I could see the waffling on my right side. So I knew that the spirits were still there. And Abigail spoke up and she said, I want you to meet my friends. Isn't the little girl beautiful? And I said, yes, she is. And Abigail just about came out of her chair and she says, can you see them? And I said, yes. And she said, don't tell anybody. Tell them, they'll put you on medication and they'll think you're crazy. So here this woman, now she was jacked up with all kinds of pharmaceuticals for her hallucinations, and she was still seeing them anyway because they weren't hallucinations, and she had the wherewithal to know the difference, that, to warn me not to mention it.
Yeah.
So we kept it as our little secret. About a little over a month later, she was actually in an active decline, and I came in on my shift, and she was in that rallying stage where she was hard to rouse. And I came into her room and I said to her, I said, Miss Abigail, it's Lynn. I'm here to check your blood pressure. And she brightened up almost immediately. And she said, I am so glad that I get to see you one more time. And she said, tomorrow my parents are coming to get me and I'm going home.
Wow.
Well, I knew what that meant, because a lot of times they do know. Though my mother, for instance, went around the facility telling everybody goodbye, and even told a lady that had her dog put down that she would care for the dog until the lady could cross over and retrieve the dog. And she ended up dying the next day. So with Abigail, she was telling me that her parents were coming, and I knew what that meant. And I kissed her cheek and I said, you precious lady. I said, thank you so much for allowing me to be part of your healthcare team. And she interrupted me and she said, you are very much loved on the other side. And this makes me cry every time I think about it. She said, you are very much loved on the other side and you need to keep doing what you're doing. And I said, you precious lady, we will see each other again someday. And she said, oh, we most certainly will.
Wow.
And that was the last time that she was coherent. Throughout the night, I checked on her multiple times and, tried to shift her a little bit so she wasn't laying in the same spot, and checking her. And then the next night I was off, and at around 10:30 at night, I could feel her. And she's like, I made it home. And sure enough, she passed away at around 10:30 the night before. That night that I felt her. When I went in and I heard that she had passed, I'm like, well, when did she pass? And she passed around between like 10 and 10:30. And the thing is about people too, is when they're transitioning, sometimes they stay embodied until the last minute. And sometimes they leave as early as a day and just leave the physical body there to finish. And sometimes they're standing right next to people in the room watching, trying to console their loved ones or type thing. But, and I know this to be true. My mother was an example of that, where she chose to stay in until the last minute. And I'll be happy to share that story with you if you'd like.
Yeah.
Okay, my mom had cancer, and as I had made mention, she was going around the facility telling people goodbye because she knew that it was her time to go. But it had gotten to a point where she was rallying and she no longer could open her eyes or verbalize. However, she would move her eyebrows up and down and try to mouth words whenever somebody would say something to her. Like they'd come into the room and they'd say, hi, Phyllis. And she'd start moving her eyebrows up and down and try to mouth words. And it was appropriate. It wasn't random.
Yeah.
And so as I was sitting there, I was the only one there. My brother wasn't able to make it in time. And I think that I was meant to see this. And it was a beautiful thing for me the reason for which I wrote my book, The Colors of Heaven, to help take the stigma of death and dying away. I'm sitting in a recliner and I noticed on the opposite side of the room that the ectoplasmic wall, which looks like a mist, only it's more dense, like a cloud looking thing, started to build from floor to ceiling, wall to wall. in her room on that opposite side, and I could see movement. I could sometimes see a shoulder peek out or a pant leg peek out. And yes, people, they do show up in clothes. You know, nobody wants to see their mother naked when she comes to greet them on the other side. It'd be like covering up your face and saying, Mom, please get some clothes on. So it would be too weird. So yes, they do show up in clothes, and they usually show up in the way that you remember them last. However, last healthy. So like if someone has lost significant weight with cancer, you're not going to remember them at 70 pounds. You're going to remember them at 180 pounds when they were healthy. So, but you will recognize them. And I'm sitting there, I'm holding my mom's hand and I'm stroking her. And I noticed that up towards the head of her bed, the misting starts to efface, and in walks my grandmother, my mother's mother, and we called her Grandma Girl. And when she walked in, she had her tight little curly perm and her leisure suit that she made herself, and she looked the exact same as I saw her the last time. She even presented in glasses, and I recognized her. And she came over to my mother's bed. And keeping in mind that the filters, as I'd mentioned with Edna, that they face so that they're able to hear the telepathy as well as the physical communication, my grandmother walked over and she started stroking the inside of my mother's arm. And she leaned forward and she said something to my mother in her ear. And my mother immediately responds by moving her eyebrows up and down and trying to mouth words. And this happened 3 times. Every time that my grandmother would go forward and say something in her ear, my mother would respond with the mouthing and the eyebrow thing. And behind my grandmother's head, I see this frantic wave. And it's my beautiful sister, Robin, who was murdered by a jealous boyfriend when she was 20. And I could smell her perfume. It filled the room. She wore an unusual kind of perfume back in the 80s. And it just... I could smell it so strong. And she came around from the group of people around the misting, and she actually came over and embraced me, and I could feel her hair falling over my face. She had long hair. I could smell her. I could feel her essence. And when she went to go back around the people, I was sitting in the chair when she embraced me, so she was kind of leaning over me. But when she went back around the people, the whole wall had effaced. And I was able to see in there, I could see this big, beautiful reception that they had made for my mother's arrival home. It was a very beautiful event. There were colors over there that are just not even imaginable over here. You'd need like 10 color wheels to match up with what they've got over there. And so as my mother was, sitting there, and I said to her, I said, Mom, I kissed her cheek, told her I would be fine. I said, Grandma and Robin are here to take you home, and it's time for you to go home. And of course, she starts moving her eyebrows up and down and trying to mouth words. And she took her last breath about 10 minutes later. But the thing is that while I'm sitting there holding her hand, I'm watching the festivities that are going on the other side. And I notice that this group of beings come forward, and they stand towards the head of her bed in like what looked like a football huddle.
Yeah.
And when they stood up, my mother's spirit was in the middle, in the center of that. And it was almost like they were trying to stabilize her spiritual feet. And my mother was beaming. And the people, there were a lot of people over there that I recognized from this lifetime that had passed over. There were many people there that I didn't recognize, but my mother knew everybody. And they were coming up, greeting her one by one, saying hello to her. She was so happy. And I looked over and I noticed that she had stopped, her physical body had stopped breathing. And I'm sitting in this elation. And when you're sitting in this elation, you can't help but smile. I mean, the love that comes from that other side, there's no words that can express it. There's no feeling that can touch it. And like I said, that you just can't help but exude joy when you're in it and smile. So I noticed that she has stopped breathing. And I start thinking to myself, oh my goodness, I better call the nurse and to have her pronounced dead. Because if the nurse walks in, finds my mother dead, and I'm sitting here smiling from ear to ear, that's not a normal response. She might think that I put a pillow over her head or something. So I called the nurse, and the nurse came in, and she walked through the spiritual festivities. They just continued on, didn't even notice her there. And she pronounced that my mom was gone. And I asked, I said, can I stay in the room? And stay here with my mom, because I wanted to watch and see what else was going to happen, because all of these festivities are going on. And she said yes. So I stayed in the room, and it literally went on for about 20 minutes our time. And I say 20 minutes our time because there is no time element on the other side. It's timeless, and we're linear here. And in my book, I mentioned about time being similar to 25 of our years, only so that people could get the idea of what a short period of time it is that we are gone from there to the people on the other side. Yeah. Because there's no way to put it into words that there's no time. So, and people that are linear have to have a time frame. So if anybody reads it and says, no, that's not correct, there is no time on the other side, the reason why I wrote it that way is so that they could understand that, from a linear standpoint, how it would be. So I'm watching everything. And the thing about it is, Eric, there were these other beings that were there. There were angels, there were loved ones, but there were these magnificent, very, very tall beings with white luminous hair. They were so tall that their heads were kind of going through the ceiling, and the ceiling was like a 10-foot ceiling. So, I mean, they were like their foreheads were up to their foreheads in the ceiling. And I'm watching these gorgeous beings, and I'm like, they look to be the level of angels, but they didn't have wings. And I'm like, I wonder who these gorgeous, I mean, you couldn't tell if they were male or female. It didn't matter. They were just gorgeous. And the love that they exuded. But the thing in that moment that I realized is that, people talk about the UFOs and they talk about the angels. Everybody's right, okay? Because those beings appeared to look like they were from somewhere else. And if you think about it, we are energy. And if you want to take it from a scientific standpoint, energy cannot be created or destroyed. And it would be ignorant for us to think, with as many stars as there are in the sky that could be sunshines to other solar systems, that we are the only ones. There's got to be other beings in other solar systems somewhere else. So, and the thing is that they're energy too. So when their lifespan finishes wherever they're at, they have to have some place to go to. I'm not talking about the cryptid looking things, but I'm talking about these beautiful, beautiful beings that cross over. So everybody's right. There you got people arguing over, well, we're alien or we're angels. Everybody's right. So I thought that was very, very interesting. And they actually walked with my mother as my mom was in the room. It started to thin out as people approached her. Then they kind of went off and went about their business. And as they were getting ready to leave the room, I'm now sitting in the recliner, and there's a window behind me. And I don't know if it's, you hear somebody say, oh, crack a window. I don't know if that's true or not. It might have just been coincidence that they were heading in that direction anyway, because I've been in rooms with no windows and they still exit anyhow. But they were headed in that direction. And I could see my mom getting ready to pass me in her patient gown. And my mom had beautiful legs. So I could see her lower half and then the waffling to the air on the upper half. But I recognized her beautiful legs and felt her pass by. And they each made contact with my head that felt tingly. And they exited, and they were gone. And the thing is I never grieved the loss of my mother. I was very close to my mother, but I never grieved her loss because to me, she wasn't gone. I could see her there, standing there before, greeting everybody. And now I'm seeing her walk out. And the thing is, too, is I'm still in touch with her. Every once in a while, I have some funny things that happen. But one time I asked her, I said, Mom, don't you ever miss the taste of potato salad? She had a special recipe for a few things, or the brownies that you used to make, or barbecued ribs. And she said, like a megaphone, she comes through and she says, we don't eat here. And I said, well, I know that. She says, but we do everything by thought. She said, so if, like, for instance, if we want to go somewhere, we think of it and we are instantly there. She said, so with our loved ones, we're instantly there. Plus, they can be 6 places at one time simultaneously. So they can be with you in the car and with your other relative at the breakfast table in the morning at the same time. So, but then they're instantly there. And she says, so if we want to experience a food from our lifetime, all that we have to do is think about it, and the flavor and the sensation comes to us as if we are eating it. And I thought to myself, wow, wouldn't that be great with Ben and Jerry's? I mean, you could eat as much as you want and not have to worry about the calories.
Right.
So she shared that with me. And, she has shared a lot of things with me. I also recently lost my sister, and which is not in the book. So these are little spoiler alerts, but for the next book. But I say that sometimes people leave their bodies early, because I saw my sister leave her body about 35 minutes before her body finished breathing. So, and I've seen a lot of people leave their bodies early and just leave the physical body there to finish. So yeah, it's an amazing thing. I also, if you want me to share, I have stories of people that have been transitioning, and when they come back after that rallying state, like you were saying, they start talking about things that they've seen on the other side.
Yeah, I've seen some of that. Before we get into that, I've had a few visitations from my mother and 2 of my aunts that have passed away, and they were in dreams, but this is unlike any dream I've ever had before or since, in the 3 times that I've dreamt about each one of them. And it was just like I knew that I wasn't asleep, but I wasn't awake. And we were in like this, the first time it happened was with my mom. We're in like this, I don't know, like outside in like a park setting with all these beautiful trees. And we sit down at this picnic table, and I'm talking to my mom, and, of course she looks amazing, healthy and amazing. And she came back to tell me that she was okay and not to worry about her. And she knew I've been in the paranormal since I was a teenager, since I was a kid. So she knew, that this has been a big question of mine. That's why I'm going out and investigating and things. And so she came back to let me know that she was okay. And then she brought back both of my aunts after they passed away, in the same setting. We're sitting at a picnic table. My aunts, I'm sitting there with my mom talking to her, and my Aunt Anna comes walking around the tree, and, she's completely healthy and looks young and good, and doesn't really say anything, but it was just showing me that, she's okay. And then my Aunt Pam, after she passed away, was the same thing, the same type of dream. And but the conversation with my mom is different each time, because it was catered to talking about, don't worry about your Aunt Anna, your Aunt Pam, they're with me on the other side now, and we're good. And, you'll see us later on down the road. And those dreams really affected me. And I hate to call them dreams, because it like cheapens it, because it wasn't a dream. You know what I'm saying? It was a real experience.
Yes.
And my mom still comes and visits. And when I know she's around, she wore Jovan Musk, which a lot of people, they don't wear that anymore as a perfume. And my house has been, I inherited my parents' house because they're both gone, and the house has been completely remodeled, new drywall and things. So there's no way that smell, is permeated in the walls, but I'll get a whiff of that when she comes back to visit. And, and I'll feel her around, and it's just like it's an amazing calming feeling. And I think like you were talking about with your mom, you didn't have to necessarily go through the grieving process. I don't think I had to with my mom either, because she came back and said, hey, I'm good. And I think that helped a lot, to kind of speed that process up. Not to say that I don't still miss her, being around and things and on holidays and stuff, but just having that validation from her that her and my aunts are okay, I think made it a whole lot easier to deal with them, not being around, and that it's more of a, like you're saying, it's more of a I'll see you later than a permanent goodbye.
Exactly. And that's so beautiful what you said. And by the way, they are around during the events. So, with my mom, we made a pact before she passed away, and people can make pacts with their loved ones even after, because they can hear you talking the same as Eric and I are talking right now. And I had asked her, I said, Mom, sometimes life is so stressful, and I might not be paying attention and noticing that you're around when you are. So would you leave one of your hairs? And she had this long pearlescent white hair that was wavy, I mean, really long. And so she said, okay. So on the day of her viewing, I went to draw a bath and I put a little bit of bubbles in it, and I go to get in the tub, and lengthwise sitting on top of those bubbles was one of my mother's hairs.
Wow.
So, and I'm thinking, oh, well, she used to live here, so maybe, something floated in there, but it brought me comfort. But there were two situations, and I'm still fine. And I have moved 3 times. I've had 2 cars that she's never, been in. And I still found a white hair across the chair at the dining room table at Thanksgiving that was hers. But there was another, for instance, that again can't be disputed. And I had gone back to school to further my education, and I was getting ready to go to my class to take a very, very hard test, and I was supposed to pick up some loose leaf papers to go into a binder before arriving to class. So I went to the bookstore, the school bookstore. I picked out that binder out of about 20 different colors and about thousands of binders. I picked the one that I want, and I go and I get the loose leaf papers, and I go straight from the bookstore to my car, from my car into the classroom on the campus. I go straight to my classroom. I'm sitting at my desk, and I take the binder out of the bag and the loose leaf papers out of the bag to put inside of it. And when I open that loose leaf, the binder, in the center ring of that binder is a white hair that is looped over and over again like a bow in the teeth of that center ring. Now, there is no way. Granted, it could be a fluke thing and somebody that was packaging it, a hair gun in there, but there were thousands of binders in multiple colors for me to choose from, and I picked that one.
Right.
Yeah. So it brought a lot of comfort to me that day, because I was stressing over a test that I didn't feel prepared to take. And, she was letting me know that she was there with me, and it did bring a lot of comfort. And they can do that. My sister that has passed, she comes with the dragonflies, and she leaves feathers all over the place. She had an aviary, but her aviary was in Louisiana, and I'm finding feathers in the middle of literally parrot feathers. So they're not feathers, they're parrot feathers. So they're blue and yellow, from macaws, and white ones from cockatoos and stuff like that I'm finding in my hallway. And my sister's never been in this house.
Right.
So it's not just like blue jay feather. These are feathers that are unique to her.
My mom started messing with me right off the bat. She had already planned her own memorial and stuff, and she did not want to have a viewing of her body because she wanted everybody to remember her, how she was. And so she was cremated before her service, her memorial service, and celebration of life, whatever you can call it. And she always loved to hear. I've sang my entire life. I took vocal lessons. I've always been a singer. I DJ karaoke and things. And my mom always loved to hear me sing, and she was big into music, and she's part of the reason why I'm big into music. And so I made the CD of music to play at her memorial. And I knew some of the songs that she, wanted played and things like that. And I knew her taste in music. And this is a brand new CD. We had played it on the way to the funeral home. And whenever they played it at her memorial, every song skipped to almost to the point where it was unplayable. And my husband just turned to me and said, your mom's fucking with you, right?
Yeah.
and that's what it was. She was messing with me. And I took the CD afterwards, and it played just fine. Not a scratch on it, nothing. And at least every song skipped at least 3 or 4 times before it would play. And the people at the funeral home were like, horrified. And I'm up there laughing, trying to not to laugh about it, but I knew that was her saying, hey, quit being sad, I'm here. And then a couple of years ago, she does funny things sometimes. A couple of years ago, it's been 2 years ago now, in around October-ish, my mom loved candy corn. And and I'm diabetic, so there's no candy corn in my house. And this was around, candy corn season, September, October. And I'm walking through my kitchen, and we have a big island that's like 3 foot by 4 foot, big island out in the middle of the kitchen. and I'm walking between it and the fridge, and I feel something hit me in the back, and I hear it hit the floor. And I'm like, what the hell? And it was a piece of candy corn. And
yes.
I also have 8 dogs. So there's no way that there's any food in my floor because, they're like little vacuums. And so there's this piece of candy corn, and I picked it up and I hollered at my husband, Roger, who was in the other room, folding laundry or something. And I'm like, you're not gonna believe this shit. Come here. And he comes in the kitchen. And I'm like, where did this come from? He's like, what do you mean? Because he doesn't eat candy corn. And I'm like, I just got hit in the back by this. And he's like, your mom's messing with you again, And so yeah, she was a funny lady in life too. But yeah, she does things like that she knows that I'll understand, things that only would be her, And but she knows that she has to do something that weird for me to notice it to be her, if that makes sense. Because little bitty things, because I do the paranormal all the time, right? I investigate and things. And we have a resident ghost as well in my house. And so, little bitty things I would just chalk up to the resident ghost opening doors, something like that. So she has to do something very specific, to let me know that she's around, like the perfume and the candy corn and things. But yeah, it's pretty amazing. And I don't have any other way to explain that,
That's true. That is amazing. And it was definitely her. Definitely.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with that. They lead things, and they're subtle things, and people can ask, but be clear about what you want them to do, and then so that they can accomplish it. If you don't want to change it from a flower to a ladybug, eat every other day type thing, you make it one thing and stick with it, and they can communicate with you that way. So yeah, and it does bring comfort. Didn't you find that it brings comfort?
Yeah. Oh, it put a huge smile on my face. And I've, told all my friends about it because they, a lot of them knew my mom really well, and they all thought it was funny, not even necessarily believing in the paranormal, but they believe me, when I tell them like this candy corn came out of nowhere and hit me in the back, like, and then I heard it hit the floor. So, but yeah, I think it also brought comfort to some of my other family members too, that probably have a harder time, because I was raised by my grandmother. So when I say my mom was my grandmother, and I was her 10th kid to raise. And so, she had 3 stepkids and 6 kids of her own. And, so some of her kids, my aunts and uncles, have had a harder time with her being gone than I have, and, because of things like that show me, like the dream with her coming, and, but I think that part of it, me telling them, helped comfort them as well, because they knew her sense of humor, and, and they believe me as well, whether they want to admit it or not.
Yeah. And that's wonderful. A lot of times people say, well, why can't I see him? Well, because you're looking too hard.
Yeah.
And that's the truth. They're wanting it so badly that they're just looking too hard. But that is just so beautiful. My mother has a wonderful sense of humor too. And I remember, after she passed away in July, and she would make the turkey at Thanksgiving every year. So she wasn't there in November to make the turkey. And so the responsibility of it fell on to me. And I'm in the kitchen, and I'm fixing this turkey. I'm thinking that I'm doing such a great job. And all of a sudden I hear her voice come through. She comes through like a megaphone sometimes. And she says, "Don't forget the aluminum foil." And I'm like, I don't want any aluminum foil. I want one of those nice brown turkeys like the ones on TV. Well, I learned real quick that the reason why you need the aluminum foil is to evenly cook it. And I ended up burning the breast, and the legs were still raw. So we ended up having hamburgers for Thanksgiving that year because I ruined the turkey.
Yeah.
And I had to say to her, "Mom, I should have listened, I'm sorry." So, yeah, the thing about too, when people cross over, sometimes too, they ask about, with sudden death, things like, and I know that this is a tough subject, but about suicide. And I wanted to tell people that commit suicide do not go to hell like some of the religions believe. They do not. Suicide is something that you should never, ever, 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 ever do. We are given multiple spaces within our lifetime that we can exit, but suicide is not one of them. However, with suicide that is assisted because you have a terminal illness or your death is coming within a time, that is seen as acceptable. You still get the grand reception and all of those sorts of things. They also consider whether somebody is suffering from mental illness or not, and it is totally seen differently with that as well. But if somebody commits suicide just out of spite, to get even with somebody, oh, well, I'm going to, my girlfriend doesn't want me anymore, or my boyfriend doesn't want me anymore, so I'm going to hang myself. Yeah. That is a very, very selfish, unloving act. And the reason why suicide is not only seen negatively here in the physical world, and negatively isn't the word that I'm looking for, but in the spiritual side, it is frowned upon also because of the rippling effect that it creates for generations. Because people, when we come here, we have certain goals to meet. And in meeting those goals, we need people to help us at certain points, and those people need us to help them. Like, for instance, children that are coming in. You may have a rocket scientist coming in through your granddaughter, through that person, or a doctor that's going to cure cancer coming in through your son. And if they commit suicide, that contract that you've created with that person waiting to come in to do that doesn't get to come in and do that.
Right.
So, and that's where the rippling effect goes on for generations and why it is frowned upon. When people commit suicide, they usually are wandering around for a little while afterwards, and they can see their body hanging there, or whatever way that they chose to go out. And there's usually a person that is sent in that is familiar to them once they leave their body, but it's not usually a family member. They don't get the grand reception. They don't really get to meet with their family. And again, this is for selfish reasons, not mental illness, not assisted suicide. They do get to see their loved ones. They do get the reception. But this soul comes in to collect them finally. And when they collect them, they go straight into their life review. They go through their life review, which they also go to the, is it Akashic or Akashic records? And they go and in there, there's like cubbies on both sides of the walls with veils. And those are missed opportunities. Any cubby with a veil or a sheer type thing that's over it is an opportunity that you missed. But then they, after doing their life review, they then go into schooling, and they are returned here as soon as possible in a situation as close as what they came through and begin with, and sometimes even worse, so that they can live out their life up to that point to make sure that they don't commit the suicide again, and that they handle the situation differently and move on. So that's kind of how that works.
Yeah, that's amazing. I never thought about that butterfly ripple effect. Because they're choosing to take themselves out, not letting the natural course of life run its course. And, thinking about just the small interactions that we have with people that have big effects on people, and the things that you say to people. And like you're saying, people that just momentary coming in your life to teach you a lesson, or for them to learn a lesson, and for those missed opportunities, that's an amazing way to look at it. I've never thought of it that way.
Yeah, it is. And people question that, but, again, they don't go to hell. Yeah. So a lot of people assume that they do go to hell. And the thing is, too, is with death, people at their time of death, they can choose to cross over or not. And just as they have freedom of choice here, they have it at that time. And if they choose not to cross over, those are usually the lost souls that are wandering around haunting people's houses and shaking their bed in the middle of the night. So, and it kind of leaves them in that fourth dimension of a realm where there's a lot of really funky stuff in there. But so, and I've had, for instances too, with people that have approached, they do, the lost souls, especially in the facilities when somebody's passing, they do come forward because they can see the angels and the loved ones come in too. And I have a story with that But I also have one when you had mentioned that you were talking about somebody fearing death. I had one, for instance, with a lady, and it wasn't because she had done something bad, but she was married and her husband had gotten into an automobile accident when he was 30 and he died, and she never remarried. And now she's like in her 90s, and she was worried that when she crossed over that he would be repulsed by her now aged appearance.
Yeah.
And she was concerned about that because he was still going to look all dapper in his 30-year-oldness, and the median age on the other side is 35. So I told her, I said, well, your soul doesn't look aged, for one thing, and he's going to see you and remember you the way that he saw you last. And not only that, he's been with you throughout your lifetime, and he's aware of the aging effect. However, he sees your soul and not your physical body. And there's a difference. Your soul is not aged. Your physical body is. Yeah. And she seemed to be relieved by that, because she had her concerns that she would be rejected, and she, didn't want to do that. So, but I have had some situations too with lost souls that approach at the time of death. If you want me to share any of that, I'll be happy to.
Yeah, real quick. I think it's one of your stories that I've heard you either told here on my show or maybe on Cisco's show. And because I get people all the time that ask me, do I think that there are spirits that are stuck? And I believe this is one of your examples, and this is just a brief example of what I tell people. But you came across a male spirit, I think in a hospital, and he didn't want to cross over because his wife and his mistress had crossed over, and he was afraid they'd still be mad at him. Yes, he was going to get scolded. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I called him Dapper Dan, and I mean, he'd been dead for a while. But when you go, and I'm sure you've run into this too, when you go on the paranormal, some of the the investigations, some of these pubs and things like that, where you go in and there's mafia in there. A lot of times you can offer to cross them over, and they don't want to cross over either because they're in there with their mistresses and they don't want to have to face the music with their wives. So they'd rather stay embodied and not, disembodied and on earth, crossing over. And a lot of times too, people choose not to cross over because they feel unworthy. And a lot of that is based on traditional religion and making them feel guilty. And also there's a lot of times in situations where people may be caring for a sick person or a disabled person, and instead of the disabled person passing first, the caretaker passes, and they continue to have that worry and that doting over the person that is disabled until that person crosses over, and then the caretaker gets stuck because they've been here for a while and they lose their way. And the thing about ghosts is that that when you see them, most of the time they're looking straight ahead or side to side or down. You don't usually see them looking up. And a lot of times with spirits, if you tell them to look up, that cord that is dulled reconnects with them or brightens with them and makes that attachment, and then they instantly disappear because they go ahead and they, go to the other side. So, and I find that to be interesting too, that, you can tell them, if you want to cross over, you need to look up and reconnect, and you'll instantly go.
Yeah. I always tell people, I don't think any spirits are necessarily stuck here. I think, like you're saying, they've chosen to stay behind, and whether they lose their way or not, they're not ever stuck. There is a way for them to move on if they really want to.
That's true. In the case of like the caretaker and stuff, and there are some of them that don't realize they're dead. Yeah. So you have to sometimes tell those, but they aren't stuck, but sometimes they do lose their way. So, and in the case of like the caretaker, they needed to be reminded how to reconnect, and then they were able to go.
Yeah. There's another story I think that you had told too about a gentleman who his wife had died and then he had died, and she was trying to come back and get him to cross over. But he just kept going through his routine of reading the paper and, sitting at the kitchen table or whatever. And because he didn't want to face death and cross over.
Yeah, I believe that was one of Cisco's stories that we were talking about on the thing. I remember her mentioning that, in the nursing field, as I had mentioned too, that people, when they're in that transitioning state or they're rallying and they come back and they talk about what they've seen on the other side is also very interesting. And the thing is a lot of the things that they talk about are consistent. Yeah. I mean, it's not just one person talking about it. It's 5 people talking about the same thing of what they've seen. They talk about the colors. They talk about, seeing loved ones and that sort of thing. And I've had a couple of, for instances, where I've been in the room caring for a client, and a family member has also been in there in physical body, and the client has started talking about things in reference to that person that they've seen on the other side. And I'll be happy to share that if you want me to.
Yeah.
I had a lady that was in the transitioning state, and her niece, April, was in the room, and I'm caring for the lady. I'm giving her mouth care and stuff like that. And all of a sudden she brightens up, and she's in that rallying state. And she says to her niece, April, and April's like in her 40s. She's like 45 or 46 years old. And I'm mentioning this for a reason. And all of a sudden my client goes, "When are you going to have those baby girls? I want to see those baby girls before I go home to Jesus." And April turns to her aunt and she said, "Aunt," I'll call her Sarah because I can't say her name, but Aunt Sarah, I can't have children. I've been trying for 25 years to have children, and I'm in menopause now. So I don't know, why you're saying that, but it would be a nice thought if it could happen, but I can't have children anymore." And she, her aunt then insisted. She said, "These are your little girls. I've seen you with one in each arm." She said, "They have blonde ringlet hair, chocolate brown eyes, and dimples, and they look like you." And lo and behold, April's aunt passed away. About 6 months later, because April had her father and uncle who also went through the unit, not necessarily passing, one of them did, but one of them had surgery and had come through the unit. I see April about 6 months later, and she walks in with a baby bump. And of course, I had to go over and ask.
Yeah.
So, "Hey, what you got in there?" So she starts smiling and she says, she says, "My aunt was right." She said, "I was actually pregnant at the time that she passed, but I was so early pregnant that I didn't know it." She said, "And I am carrying identical twin girls."
Wow.
So when the little girls, because I saw April come into the unit 2 other times, I got to see the little girls when they were probably about 6 months old, and then again when they were about 18 months old and toddling. And lo and behold, those little girls had blonde curls, brown eyes, and dimples, and they looked just like the mom.
Wow.
Yes, I kid you not. And that wasn't the only one. I had another lady too, and this lady was in her 50s. She was an only child. She was in there with her mom. And her mom said to her, "There's a little boy in here calling me grandma." And and Susan says to her mom, she said, "Well, I don't know why there'd be a little boy in here calling you grandma. I'm an only child, and I'm not married, and I don't have any children." And she says, "No, this little boy, he resembles you, and he's calling me grandma." And so lo and behold, she went to the break room at the facility to get something, and there was a man in there whose wife had just passed away, and he was waiting for his family to arrive. And they struck up a conversation, and they supported each other over the phone for about a year, helping each other through their grieving process. And all of a sudden he decides to ask her out. Well, one thing led to another, and they ended up 6 months later getting married, and she's now like 51 or something like that. And I run into her in a grocery store, and she's got this little 3-year-old boy with brown hair, and the lady mentioned brown hair, sitting in the cart. She's talking to him, and I see her, and I'm like, "Wow." I said, "How are you doing?" And she said to me, she says, "This is my son." And he was perfectly fine, and she had him, and she went on to tell me the story about how she announced to her husband when she found out that she was pregnant, because she went to the doctor because she thought she had mono. And because she was like in the tail end of menopause, and pregnancy at 50 some odd years old was the last thing that she thought that it could be.
Right.
And it turns out that, that they had called her back the next day for a sonogram because the doctor was concerned that maybe it was a tumor or something, even though they had sent out the urine test. For some reason they weren't able to do it there or something. So she came back the next day to have the sonogram done and found out that she was a couple of months along with this little boy. Yeah. So she said that she got a onesie and some blue socks and wrote something on it, and she gave the present to her husband, who's talking about getting a boat now that all the kids are grown and out of the house, because he had children from his other marriage. And he opens the thing and he's like, well, who's having a baby? And she says, we are. And he says, what? And she says, and it's a boy. And he says, oh, well, there goes the boat. But she was telling me that, and that it was funny. And I mean, she had a baby that was perfectly fine, but the grandmother was seeing the little boy before she passed. And so many things, people come back talking about different things like that end up being true.
Yeah.
That people are like, oh, there's no way that could happen. Well, lo and behold, it did. So yeah. So, and again, those are things that you can't dispute when you see the result of them with your own eyes. As I had mentioned to you too, my father had a near-death experience, and he had gone to the doctor for his yearly physical. And when the doctor looked into his eye, there were bulging veins, which indicated that he had a clot somewhere that it wasn't supposed to be, and that it was starting to occlude some of the major veins and vessels that he had. So they immediately sent him over to the hospital. And when he got to the hospital, fast-moving clot that was going to occlude a major area, and I mean, he literally had hours to live.
Yeah.
So they didn't have time to put him on blood thinners and thin it out or anything like that. So they had to go in and surgically remove it, and with one of those little basket things. And after his surgery, he made it through his surgery fine. But when he got to the recovery room, he started to rouse, and he said that there was this overwhelming feeling of the nurse was getting ready to give him morphine in his IV. And she started to put it into the line, and he said, no, I don't want that. But it was too late. She had already put it through. And she's like, what? This is your pain medicine. You don't want your pain medicine? And the room went black, and he felt himself coming out of his body. He actually turned around and saw his body. He saw the crash carts come in. And he also told me that he was able to be in 6 places simultaneously out of his body, as my mother also did. And at that moment, he said, as he was rising up into this tunnel of sparkling gold, shimmering like stars, but like 1,000 times more than we have in the sky. And it was very comforting and light and loving. And he was aware of other spirits in the distance that were also transitioning upward. But he made mention that he was with all of his children and his new wife that he had just gotten married to 6 months earlier from Russia. And he knew that after visiting all of his children, that we would all be okay if he crossed over. But he knew that his wife would not be, because she didn't even know how to drive. She didn't know how to balance an American bank checkbook or anything like that. So he was given the option to return or to stay. And he decided, he got to see my sister Robin, who was on the other side as well. But so he opted to return. And he said that when he returned, that he could feel his body feeling his spirit going back into the weight of his body and feeling the pain from his surgery. The thing about my dad is that he was a very, very intelligent man. He was a math professor. He also had a degree in chemistry, and he was just this brilliantly intelligent man, but he was a raging alcoholic. And he wasn't a happy one when he was drunk. He was a very physically violent, very angry man. And when he came back from that experience and having his life review and seeing what he had created and the way that he made people feel, because he did have his life review, he was a totally changed man. He immediately stopped drinking. He stopped all of that, and he lived another 10 years. And in that 10 years, he made sure that his wife could drive, and he made a list of everything, including his eulogy and his paper for what he wanted to have go in the newspaper for when he passed away. He wrote it out all himself.
Wow.
And and he wrote out everything, like, this is where the life insurance policy is. This is the person that you contact. This is their phone number. I mean, he was very thorough to make sure that he left her in good condition when he passed away. And that's another thing too. A lot of times when people are diagnosed with a terminal illness, they immediately, and I've seen this, I've gone into homes doing care management for an insurance company where I would actually visit clients in their homes, and also as a nurse when I did some private duty. And you would find these people curled up in fetal position, laying there literally waiting for death to come. And I've had to tell some of them that this is not the time to wait for death. This is the time to get your things in order. Yeah. So if you have a roof repair that needs to be done, and you're going to be passing and leaving your wife who won't be able to accomplish that on her own, then it's time to make arrangements to have it done. It's time to let them know, whether you want to be cremated or buried and where the money's buried. These things that it is your time to get things in order. And to me, it was hard to see those situations, but 90% of the time when I came back, they were up out of bed and they were dressed and they were doing things, even though they could only do them in short spurts, but they were getting things in order. And it's so important that, people do that, especially for their loved ones that are being left behind. In my book, Colors of Heaven, I have a self-help section in the back that walks you through your end-of-life directives. It talks about how to have a healthcare power of attorney with the 5 wishes pamphlet, that you only need 2 signatures or to have it notarized in front of a notary to make it active. I've explained what healthcare power of attorney is versus power of attorney. A lot of people don't understand that. And something else, don't ever go into a hospital and sign for anybody for any treatment other than yourself, or if you have children under 18, because you get stuck with the bill. And I don't care what the hospital says. And you got these social workers that come in there, need you to sign papers. Just because you're the POA of your loved one, if they are of sound mind and they are able to speak for themselves, that POA is nothing, or healthcare power of attorney is nothing but a piece of paper that sits there. And the reason that it's there is for people when they cannot speak for themselves. Yeah. Then they have somebody designated to make their wishes known. I had an example of a friend of mine that her husband went into the emergency room for kidney stones, and he was getting undressed. He was in the outpatient, and she's on the phone with me, and I hear the office person come in, and all of a sudden I hear my friend say, "Oh, I'm his power of attorney. I'll sign those papers." And she took the papers and signed them. And I said, "Why did you do that?" And she says, "Well, I'm his power of attorney." I'm like, "No, you're not. He is standing there alert and oriented, and he could speak for himself. And it was illegal for that person to hand you those papers to sign just because you said that you were the POA." I said, "It's really, really important for you to go back to that person and have them shred that document in front of you, have them reissue it to your husband and have him sign it." Yeah. And lo and behold, he had a terrible allergic reaction during the dye that they were using, during the breaking up of the stones that he was having done, and he passed away. Wow. So here she is now, she has kids, she's got a 2-income home, and she's worried that, these bills are starting to come in and she can't afford to pay them. And I told her, I said, with my father, I experienced this too. And what my stepmother was told was that, did you sign for anything? And she said, "Well, no, I went back and undid it, but what you told me to do." So no, I didn't sign for anything further. I said, "Well, what happens is what the attorney told me and told my stepmother is that what'll happen is that bill will come in, And at 30 days, and then again at 60 days, and then again at 90 days, and then you're going to get a nasty collection letter, but it's going to ruin your husband's credit. But your husband's dead.
Right.
So it doesn't matter. You are not obligated to pay that. And I'm not telling people not to pay their own bills, but don't get stuck paying somebody else's.
Right.
Trust me, when they're on the other side, they don't care about money, and they know that it's a necessity on this earth plane, and they would much rather have you keep the money to do something for yourself than to pay their bills that way when they're on the other side.
Yeah. I can't believe we've been talking for almost an hour and a half.
Oh, wow. Well, you're so easy to talk to.
It goes by so quick every time we chat. It's awesome. I love it.
Yeah, me too.
So I guess we'll wind it down now, because me and you could talk for the next 4 or 5 hours about this topic.
Yes, we could.
So you have 3 books out right now: Omnipresent, What Happens Next, and The Colors of Heaven. And those are available on Barnes & Noble and Amazon and all that. But if they go to your website and buy them, lynnmonet.com, then they'll get a personalized copy. And also all the money goes to you and not to Amazon and all them. So...
And it's not about the money. I really want the wording to get out there, but I'd like to think that if you are going to pay for it, that you would rather have it go to somebody normal than to a billionaire that has more money than God.
Right.
So, and doesn't really need it. And also I have 4 books out. Omnipresent is going to end up being a 5-book series. The second book, Omnipresent, What Happened Next, is out. 111 Becca Drive is in editing, and I'm working on Omnipresent, Gnome Place Like Home, as well as I'm working on a sequel for Colors of Heaven. I have another book called The Gap, What Else Your Adolescent and Teen Needs to Know, which is an excellent book that a counselor asked me to write, because we were looking for a book for my daughter, who's now 15, and we couldn't find anything other than The Birds and the Bees or computer etiquette and avoid strangers. So I wrote a book, and I went into and I wrote it for anybody that's wondering. It is gender neutral, so it does accommodate that too. It was very hard to write it that way because the grammar kept trying to correct me, but I did write it gender neutral. I talk about what the new gender movement is and what it means, but I also wrote in there that it's okay to be who you are, that it's okay to be who you're born as. You don't have to be something different than what you are. It's okay to be whatever you want, but it's okay to be that too. And I also talk about the first chapter is called Your Privates. And I said, it talks about what to do if a condom falls off. It talks about, going out on a date with stinky sneakers and the windows up. I don't care how handsome or attractive you are. If you're stuck in a car with somebody with smelly shoes on, it's not attractive. Right. So I talk about all of those sorts of things. And it is for every gender, every sexual preference. And it talks about, in the very first chapter, talks about your privates. There are no pictures of genitalia or anything in it, but it talks about your privates as a body part that everybody has. You got one or the other, whether you were born with it or not. You got one or the other, and it talks about it as a body part in that way.
Awesome. And we dove deep into Omnipresent and Omnipresent, What Happens Next last time we had you on the show, and that's a book about where you moved into unsuspectingly bought a haunted house that you never actually moved into.
That's right.
And the dealings that you had there, trying to find somebody to help you figure it out. So if anybody's interested in that the ghost story stuff, then go listen to that episode of the show here. And I believe that was in season 3. I don't know. It's all running together. I'm at 150 episodes now, plus. So yeah, but definitely have you back on to talk more about what you got going on with your sister's house now, and all that. Like I said, we could talk for hours and hours, and you're just always a joy to have on. I really appreciate you coming on today.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's my pleasure. I love visiting with you. We need to get some wine and cheesecake or something, because, we could, like you said, we could talk for hours about these things, but I appreciate so much you getting the word out there and the show that you have that gives people information that they do need, because there's so many people that are searching, and so many people having experiences similar to when they hear other people are having them too. It makes them not feel so alone. known. So it's so important. And I'm grateful to be here, and I'd love to come back anytime.
Yeah, we'll definitely have you back soon. It was too long in between last time and this time.
Yeah, well, a lot has happened. Life just keeps happening. So, it is what it is. But we'll make it sooner for next time.
For sure. All right, everybody, y'all stay safe out there. We'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to The Unseen Paranormal. Join me next Wednesday with a brand new guest. And please rate, review, share, and subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now. This helps more people discover the show. You can connect with me over on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or join us in the Unseen Paranormal Lounge group on Facebook. Until next time, remember, some of the scariest things are unseen. You have come